The room was suffocating, stifled with the tension between us. My parents sat across from me, their faces unreadable, their silence louder than any words could ever be. It was a strange moment. This was supposed to be the beginning of a conversation, a new chapter. But instead, it felt like I was standing on the edge of something, and I couldn't see the fall. I could already hear their expectations before I even spoke. My whole life, I had been shaped by their dreams for me, their unspoken desire for me to follow in my father's footsteps. They wanted me to go into law, or business, or medicine, something prestigious, something safe. Something that would guarantee success, that would give them the pride of having a child, who lived the life they had planned. But I had other plans. I had spent years quietly building up the courage, to say the words that had been eating away at me. I had wanted to be an artist since I could remember. I wanted to create, to draw, to paint, to shape the world with my hands and my heart. But that wasn't a path my parents understood. And it wasn't one they approved of. Ace, I sat there. I could feel my hands trembling. This was the moment that would define everything. The moment when I would either conform to their dreams or choose my own. The words came out before I could stop them. I want to be an artist. There. I said it. And the weight of those words settled in the space between us like a brick. For a moment, nothing happened. The air thickened. My mother blinked, and my father's jaw tightened. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, but what struck me the most was the shock. It was as if I had suddenly become a stranger in their eyes. You can't be serious, my father said, his voice calm but sharp. You're throwing away your future. You have an opportunity to be something great. And you want to waste it on this nonsense. My mother, always the softer one, didn't speak immediately. Her eyes watered, her lips quivering. She looked at me as though I had betrayed her, as though my decision was an unforgivable sin. This isn't what we've planned for you, she whispered. The hurt in her voice more than I could bear. Why would you want to struggle when you don't have to? Why can't you just be happy with what's given to you? I could feel the tears welling up in my own eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to appear weak. But this was the hardest thing I had ever done. Telling them felt like ripping my heart out, and holding it in front of them, hoping they would see me, really see me. I don't want your life, Mom. I said softly, the words coming out with an edge. I want my own. I can't live for you anymore. I need to live for me. There was a long silence. A silence that echoed in the walls of our house, in the spaces between us. And then, as if the dam had broken, my father stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair behind him. You're making a mistake. A big one, he spat, his voice trembling with anger. I've given you everything. Everything. And this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away for some childish fantasy. I'm not throwing anything away, I said, standing now. My hands were clenched into fists, but my voice remained steady. I'm choosing something that makes me happy. Something I can be proud of. His face twisted in fury. If you choose this path, then you're no longer my child. You are disowned. Don't come back to me when this art thing fails. Don't expect any help. I froze, the words hitting me like a slap. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I had come this far and I wasn't going to back down. Fine, I said, my voice cold now, barely above a whisper. If that's what it takes. I can't be who you want me to be. I can't live like that. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with sorrow, but she didn't say a word. She didn't argue. She didn't fight for me. And with that I walked out the door, leaving behind everything, the life I had known, the love I had once hoped for, and a family who couldn't understand me. I stepped into the unknown, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and relief. The first few weeks were a blur of confusion and exhaustion. I found myself in a tiny studio apartment, in a part of the city I had never been to before. The place wasn't much, a few pieces of second-hand furniture, a cramped kitchen, and a window that barely let in any light. It was cold and lonely, but it was mine. I spent the days trying to adjust to this new life, the life I had chosen for myself, away from the comfort and expectations of my family. I poured myself into my art, sketching and painting for hours, finding solace in the brushstrokes, in the vibrant colors that filled the canvas. But even in that, there was a weight, the weight of uncertainty, of doubt. It wasn't easy. Not by a long shot. I barely made enough to cover rent, let alone eat well or buy the materials I needed. There were days when I lived off nothing but ramen noodles and the leftover coffee from the cafe down the street. I picked up odd jobs where I could anything to survive, to keep going. I'd do graphic design for local businesses, paint signs for stores, even teach art to kids in the neighborhood. But every day was a reminder that I was starting from the bottom, that the life I had chosen wasn't going to hand itself to me. It wasn't glamorous, and sometimes it felt like I was drowning in the weight of it all. But there were moments, small moments, when I remembered why I had made this choice. The first time I sold a painting was a rush of joy I hadn't felt in years. The client, an older woman from the art district, had commissioned a piece of simple landscape, and paid me more than I had expected. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. A sign that I was on the right path. Still, there was always this gnawing feeling in the back of my mind, the feeling that I had let my parents down, that I had severed a bond that could never be repaired. They hadn't tried to contact me. Not once. The silence between us was deafening, but somehow it was easier than I had imagined. At least this way, I didn't have to deal with the judgment, the disappointment in their eyes. The weight of their expectations no longer hung over me, pulling me back from the life I had chosen. But then, one night, as I sat in my small apartment, working on a new canvas, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from my father. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't heard from them in months, and now, out of the blue, this. The words seemed so simple, so casual, but beneath them was a mountain of unspoken emotions: guilt, anger, perhaps even shame. It had been so long, and I didn't know what to expect. I felt the tension in my chest rise. What did they want from me? Was this the moment they would try to pull me back into their world, to convince me that I was making a mistake? But despite the anger that still burned inside me, despite the walls I had built around myself, I couldn't ignore the message. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set my phone down and walked over to the window, staring out into the dark streets below. The city was alive, pulsing with lights and movement, but I felt disconnected from it all. I had made my choice. I had walked away. But deep down there was still a part of me that longed for their approval, for them to see me, to understand why I had done what I did. But that wasn't what this message was about. I knew that. An hour later, I finally typed a response. What is it? I didn't want to give too much away. I didn't want them to think I was desperate for their attention, for their validation. But part of me needed to know what they had to say. The reply came quickly. Can we meet? We want to apologize. We should have supported you. I read the message over and over again, the words slowly sinking in. Apologize? I felt the tension in my chest rise. What did they want from me? Was this the moment they would try to pull me back into their world, to convince me that I was making a mistake? But despite the anger that still burned inside me, despite the walls I had built around myself, I couldn't ignore the message. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set my phone down and walked over to the window, staring out into the dark streets below. The city was alive, pulsing with lights and movement, but I felt disconnected from it all. I had made my choice. I had walked away. But deep down there was still a part of me that longed for their approval, for them to see me, to understand why I had done what I did. But that wasn't what this message was about. I knew that. An hour later, I finally typed a response. What is it? I didn't want to give too much away. I didn't want them to think I was desperate for their attention, for their validation. But part of me needed to know what they had to say. The reply came quickly. Can we meet? We want to apologize. We should have supported you. I read the message over and over again, the words slowly sinking in. Apologize? My parents apologizing. It didn't seem real. It felt like a cruel joke, like they were playing some game with me. After all that had happened, after everything they had said, they were asking for forgiveness. It felt wrong, like they were trying to rewrite history, to make it seem as though they had never disowned me, as though they had never turned their backs on me. They didn't want me to be an artist. They had made that clear. They had made me feel worthless for wanting to follow my own dreams. And yet here they were, asking for forgiveness. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to decide what to do. I had spent so many months building myself up, pushing away the hurt, learning to live without them. But I couldn't deny that their words stung. It hurt to know that they only now realized their mistake. It hurt, because I was still their child, no matter how far apart we were. I thought about the years of pressure, of never feeling good enough, of feeling like I was always in the shadow of their expectations. And then I thought about the freedom I had found, the way I had finally started to breathe again, the way my art made me feel alive, in a way I had never felt before. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive them. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. But I knew this: I had to meet them. For myself. For closure. Okay, I replied. Where and when? The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the clink of coffee cups and the hum of hushed conversations filled the air like soft music. It was the same spot he used to come to with my mom on weekends, back when life felt simpler, when I still believed that things could be fixed with the right words, the right gestures. It felt strange to be back here, but it was where they had asked me to meet. I suppose they thought it would be neutral ground. A place that wouldn't hold the weight of history. A place where we could talk as if we were strangers. But we weren't strangers. And nothing about this meeting felt neutral. I arrived first. Earlier than I had planned, needing the extra time to calm my nerves. My hands were clammy as I wrapped them around my coffee cup, the heat of the mug doing nothing to warm the chill in my chest. The memory of that message, "We want to apologize. We should have supported you." Still lingered, haunting me, making me question whether this was real. They had hurt me so deeply, and now they were coming back, asking for forgiveness. I couldn't help but feel like they were trying to undo the years of damage in one conversation, like they thought a few words could make everything better. I glanced at the door, when I saw a familiar figure walk in. My father. His expression was tight, his usual confidence muted, replaced with something I hadn't seen in him before, uncertainty. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that made him seem smaller, less imposing. He spotted me immediately, and there was a flash of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He walked over, his steps hesitant. "Hey," he said, sitting down across from me without waiting for an invitation. His voice was softer than I remembered, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Hey," I replied, my voice guarded. I wasn't sure what else to say. The years of silence between us felt like an insurmountable wall. And I wasn't sure how to begin tearing it down. My mother followed soon after. Her steps lighter but her expression equally uncertain. She looked as though she had been through something, though I couldn't quite place it. Her eyes were tired, but there was a softness to them that I hadn't seen in a long time. She sat down beside my father, and for a moment none of us spoke. The weight of everything unsaid was too heavy. Finally, my father broke the silence. "We owe you an apology, son," he said. The words slow and deliberate, like he was trying to find the right ones. I don't know what came over me. We pushed you too hard, expected too much. We didn't listen. We made you feel like your dreams weren't important, like you weren't good enough. And for that, I'm sorry." His apology hung in the air between us, its sincerity undeniable. But it was too easy, too simple. Like he had come up with it in the car ride over, rehearsing the words to make sure they sounded right. I didn't know how to respond. My mother spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper, but full of emotion. "I should have seen it sooner," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "I should have seen that you were unhappy, that you were trying to tell us something. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me, for not supporting you the way I should have." Her voice cracked at the end, and for the first time I saw the cracks in her carefully maintained facade. She had always been the pillar of our family, the one who tried to keep everything together. But I could see now that she had been just as broken as I had been, just as lost. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that I understood, but the words didn't come. Instead, I simply nodded. I felt a lump form in my throat, a strange mixture of relief and resentment. They were apologizing, and a part of me wanted to accept it, wanted to believe that they truly understood what they had done. But another part of me felt betrayed, angry that it had taken them so long to realize their mistakes. Years had passed. Years I had spent feeling rejected, invisible, unworthy. And now they thought a few words could change all of that. I took a deep breath and looked at them both. My parents, who had once been the center of my world but now felt like distant strangers. "You don't get to just apologize and expect everything to be fine," I said, my voice firm but quiet. "You hurt me. You told me I wasn't good enough. You made me feel like I wasn't worth your love, unless I followed the path you chose for me." The words tasted bitter on my tongue. But I needed to say them. I had spent years swallowing my feelings, burying my hurt under the weight of their expectations. Now, for the first time in so long, I was letting it out. "I know," my father said quietly, his gaze dropping to the table. "I know I messed up. And I can't take that back. He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't know how to handle it. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was setting you up for success. But I see now that I was wrong. I was too focused on my own vision for your life that I didn't see what you needed. And for that, I'm sorry." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I just sat there, trying to process what they were saying. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to forgive them for everything they had put me through. But a part of me understood. They were human. They had flaws. They had failed me, but maybe they were trying to make it right. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said, my voice softer now, the anger draining from me. It's going to take time. A lot of time. I need to figure out what I want from this. From you. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched mine. Take all the time you need, she whispered. We just want you to know that we love you. And we'll be here when you're ready. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward healing for all of us. The weeks that followed that conversation felt like walking through a fog, the air thick with uncertainty. My parents tried, in their own way, to show me that they were genuinely remorseful. They reached out more, checked in on me, and even offered to help in ways they never had before. My father, who had once only seen my ambitions as a burden, began asking questions about my work, about my career, about my passions. My mother, ever the caretaker, started to find small ways to make up for the years of absence, always asking if I needed something, always reminding me that she loved me. But as much as I appreciated their efforts, there was still a wall between us, built over years of hurt. A wall that couldn't be torn down by a few kind words, no matter how sincere. Every time I saw them try to be the parents I had longed for, I couldn't help but wonder if it was too little, too late. The scars they had left were deep, etched into the fabric of who I had become. I spent more time at my apartment, away from the house, trying to heal, trying to figure out what I wanted out of all of this. I had built a life that was mine, independent, self-sufficient, and in many ways, better than the one they had planned for me. The idea of returning to their expectations, to the path they had chosen for me, felt like stepping backward, like undoing everything I had worked so hard to create. But the one thing I couldn't deny was that I missed them. I missed my mother's voice when she used to call me on my birthday, just to hear my voice. Even when we weren't that close. I missed the sound of my father's laughter when he told his old stories, always full of bravado and humor, as if the world hadn't let him down. I missed them in the way you miss a home you never quite felt at peace in. The love had always been there, buried beneath the expectations. Beneath the disappointment, I just had to figure out how to find it again. One afternoon, months after that coffee meeting, I received a call from my father. He had left a message earlier that morning, asking if I could come by the house for a chat. Something in his voice sounded different this time. It was hesitant, as if he wasn't sure what I would say, or whether I would come at all. I debated for a long time before finally deciding to go. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, in some small way, it was time for us to move forward. When I arrived, the house felt different. It wasn't the same place I had once left in anger, the place that had echoed with disappointment and resentment. The air was calmer, softer, as if it had absorbed the tension over the past few months. My father was sitting in the living room, waiting for me. His eyes were tired, but there was a warmth there that hadn't been present the last time we had spoken. Hey, son, he said. His voice steady but careful. I wanted to apologize again, for everything. For the way we treated you. For not supporting you. I know it's not enough, but I wanted to say it in person. I nodded, the words settling somewhere deep inside of me, like seeds planted in rocky soil. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself considering the possibility of forgiving him. Not for him, but for me. For my peace. I know you've been trying, I said quietly. And I appreciate that. I think I'm ready to start moving forward. But it's going to take time. I'm still figuring things out. That's all I'm asking for, my father replied. I don't expect things to be fixed overnight. But I'll keep trying. And I'll be here whenever you're ready. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord in me. It wasn't an easy thing to accept. But I realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building something new. The past couldn't be undone, and the hurt couldn't be forgotten. For the first time I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. It wasn't an embrace, but it was a start. A sign that I was willing to rebuild the bridge between us, piece by piece. We didn't need to be perfect. But we could be honest. And that, I realized, was enough. I'm glad you called, I said. Let's take it one step at a time. My father nodded, a hint of relief passing over his face. One step at a time, he agreed. As I left the house that day, I felt lighter. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. And it certainly wasn't the end of all our struggles. But I had taken the first step, and that felt like progress. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just walking away from them, I was walking toward something. Toward healing. Toward a future where we could be a family again, in our own way. And that was all I needed for now.